Hi everybody, my name's Andrew and today I'm driving my 2017 Mazda Miata RF. Since my last video with this car, I've put about 3,000 miles on it, including a 1,000-mile road trip to Tail of the Dragon. And naturally, in that time, I've come up with a few things that I've started to dislike about it. That's not to say it's a bad car. I still absolutely love it, just as much as when I bought it. But every car has flaws, and so these are my top 5 things I hate about my Miata RF. Interestingly, 3 of them are actually related to the RF's power folding hardtop. Now, as I discussed previously, I initially attempted to purchase a soft top MX-5, but with the way I buy cars, the deal on this RF just worked out better for me, and so here we are with the RF. Ironically, as a result, some of my biggest complaints with this car are actually somewhat self-inflicted, I guess you could say. But it's also worth noting that my complaints in this video are not in any particular order, other than starting with the top just for the sake of flow and continuity. Most modern convertibles, whether they feature a cloth soft top like the regular Miata, or a metal hardtop like this one, have the ability to operate their power opening and closing tops at a fairly significant rate of speed. For instance, the BMW Z4, which is a cloth roof, can operate its top up to 31 miles an hour, whereas a hardtop C8 Corvette convertible can do it at 30 miles an hour. 30 miles an hour really seems to be the maximum from what I've seen. But either way, that's a pretty decent speed to be able to move your roof up and down. The Miata RF, however, the top is limited to 6 miles an hour. That's right, 6. You really might as well just be stopped at that point. I mean, in fairness, the roof folds, as you just saw, in about 12 or 13 seconds, which is one of the quickest hardtops on the market, probably also thanks to its size and the fact that the actual roof opening is only about 2 feet big. But it is kind of inconvenient. It does limit pretty severely where you can operate the roof. It is doable at a traffic light if you really need to, but it's not always ideal. You're not always going to have a traffic light or a parking lot when you need to put the roof up and down. In a soft top Miata, on the other hand, the roof is fully manual, meaning that you or your passenger can theoretically raise or lower it at any speed. Obviously that doesn't actually work because at some point the force of the wind will actually prevent you from doing so, but it's the thought that counts. By comparison, the RF has this silver switch for controlling the roof. But my problem with this switch is that depending on how your brain works, it's backwards. What do I mean by that? Well, as you can see by the little labels, you push the switch up to put the roof down, and you push it down to put the roof back up. Now, I realize that Mazda's engineers likely intended for that to actually mimic the physical movement of the roof, meaning when you put the top down, the roof actually lifts up and then backwards off of the top of the car, and vice versa when you close the roof. And if you think about it that way, the switch makes perfect sense. But unfortunately, my brain doesn't see it that way, and I'm sure many other people would agree with me, and as such is constantly confused about which way I need to push the toggle. In the olden days, quarter windows on cars were mainly used as vents for extra airflow through the cabin, but these days they're really just there for visibility, except on minivans where you can actually still open the back sometimes. Now, as you can see, the Miata does have very tiny quarter windows in the front, so you can see around the mirrors a little bit, and that doesn't create a blind spot. However, the RF, with its fixed rear buttresses, doesn't have quarter windows in the back, and the rear glass is also quite small. As a result, with the top up, this car has massive blind spots. They are just as bad as a Camaro or Challenger or any other car that's typically known for having poor visibility. On the driver's side, if you turn your head around to the side, all you see is the inner workings of the roof mechanism. And on the passenger side, well, there's what appears to be probably about 3 feet where bikes or even some cars can just completely hide from you. Now, it can be mitigated somewhat by adjusting your mirrors properly, of course, tipping them very far out, and the Grand Touring does have blind spot monitoring, but it's still not ideal. Of course, it is also helped by the fact that this car is considerably smaller than the average car, and so bigger vehicles can't hide from you quite as easily, and with the blind spot monitoring and your mirrors adjusted properly, it can really help, like I said before. The other thing, of course, is with the top down, or even just with the windows down, you can kind of poke your head out a little bit more and around the pillar if you really need to. On the subject of being blinded, actually, you may also have visibility issues thanks to the sun in this car. Well, let me rephrase that. The sun isn't in this car, but when you're in this car, the sun will affect you. You know what I mean. Anyway. Since the Miata is a tiny car, the sun visors are proportionally also tiny. And they're also the cheapest pieces of plastic known to man, and they don't have lights on them, but I don't really care about that. What I do care about is the limited action of these sun visors. Now, most cars, the visors can unclip on one end and swivel around so that you can use them on the side of you. And some cars even have an extension or allow you to slide the whole visor side to side for extra coverage. Because of the way the roof mechanism is designed in this car, these visors do neither of those things. So they are completely fixed on both sides. They do not detach at all unless you just completely rip them out, which is quite annoying. As good as their cars usually are overall, Mazda has never been great at developing infotainment systems. This mid-2010s era system, as in the Miata and basically every other Mazda product until 2021, is not the worst I've ever used, but is also far from perfect. For one thing, the screen isn't particularly big, but again, with the size of this car, it is fairly proportional, so that's really not that big of a deal. While it does feature a home menu, as you can maybe see on this camera angle, which shows your different functions that you can scroll through, there is no split screen view like in most other systems where you can see more than one thing at any given time. And as someone who's used to Apple CarPlay, that can be kind of annoying because I do like seeing my map and my music at the same time. That's partly why I have this giant phone mount right here so that I can see both at the same time, having my maps on my phone. Now, again, I suspect the screen size is really the limiting factor there in why they didn't put a split screen view on this thing. So I understand it, but still not great. And speaking of Apple CarPlay, it doesn't have Apple CarPlay, which is, again, why I have to use the maps on my phone. Granted, at the time that this car came out in 2017, Apple CarPlay had only really been around for a year or two, but most automakers had already adopted it by then, and Mazda didn't add it until 2019 on most of their products, and even 2020 or 2021 in some cases, I think. So, just not ideal. Not the end of the world, like I said, but not ideal. Additionally, backup cameras did not become mandated in the US until 2018, and this car, being a 2017, does not have one. Which is odd considering that this RF Grand Touring was roughly 35 grand new. You would think it would be kind of a given that it would have one since, you know, Corollas and things like that had them standard by then anyway. But once again, thanks to the size of this car, it's not really detrimental, since you can almost reach out the back and touch the back of the car if you really stretch hard enough. On the positive side, at least, this car, unlike newer Mazda infotainment software, does have a touchscreen. As you can see, I'm just going to touch it, and it does what I want it to. However, for some reason, Mazda decided to lock out that touch functionality when the vehicle's in motion, meaning when you're driving, both you and your passenger are forced to use the rotary dial and buttons down here in the middle. There's nothing objectively wrong with that. But, I mean, the screen's right here. Like, if I sit straight instead of turn to face the camera, like, I'm really not stretching my arm out very much to be able to touch it. I can stretch my arm out and touch the windshield if I really wanted to. So, it's just not the greatest. I mean, like I said, there's really nothing objectively wrong with the dial and button system. But, like, come on, man. Although, it is worth noting, actually, that in some cases, it would actually be safer to just use the touchscreen. Now, I know there's this whole debate about having too many things in your line of sight, but let's say you're not familiar with the button layout, or if you're like me, where you have another vehicle, an Audi Q5, that has a rotary dial and button system like this one, but all the controls are in different places, it would be easier to just see what you're touching right here or what you're changing right here rather than having to look down here and feel your way around if you're not familiar. And with that, that's where I'm going to wrap this video up. As I said at the beginning, I still absolutely adore this thing. None of these flaws really changed my opinion about the car, but as I said before, every car has flaws and you're going to notice them when you start to live with them. And that's really what this is all about. Not shitting on the car as a whole, but just pointing out some things that are useful considerations when you're actually going to be buying one of these cars. And with that said, as always, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video or found it informative in some way, give it a thumbs up or consider subscribing for plenty more content with this car and others.